It's a pleasure to see you all. We organized this meeting to speak about the USAID funding freeze. As you know, there has been information coming in and out since last week about the freeze of the funding from USAID around the world. And today we have the pleasure to have two very well-known members of the social sector that has been working in this area from several years and that has experience dealing with funding and also experience dealing with these situations that represent at the same time a challenge and an opportunity for our sector to make things different. So today I have the pleasure to introduce Jean Scrimgeour. I hope I pronounce it well, Jean. I'm sorry if I'm not. Jean is the Director of Operation and Growth at the Accountability Lab and is also co-CEO of the Accountability Lab. And I'm going to hand over to her in a minute to introduce herself. But we also have Bart Houlahan. He is co-founder of B-Lab. So Jean, over to you to introduce yourself and kick off this meeting.
Great. Hi all. Thanks so much for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation. As mentioned by Gabby, my name is Jean. I'm co-CEO of Accountability Lab, focusing primarily on innovation and operational issues. So, you know, from an operational standpoint, this has been a big deal for us. The lab is, as many of you know, a translocal network of 12 different organizations from around the world. We all follow the same vision mission. So, and we and have similar programming, but it's not exactly the same. And we mainly try to focus on making governance work for people. So trying to create spaces for people to engage in the governance and accountability space. I think just quickly as an overview of the conversation that we're going to have today, and just so everyone's on the same page, I think nothing that I'm going to say right now is new to anyone, but if there is, you know, maybe just to get us all started. On the 20th of January, President Trump released an executive order entitled Reevaluating and Realigning the United States Foreign Aid, which called for a 90-day pause in United States foreign development assistance for assessment of programmatic efficiencies and consistency with US foreign policy. This created a lot of confusion. And for the next couple of days, we were all very sort of in a bit of a panic about what this actually meant. This was clarified on the Friday, the 24th, when Marco Rubio, who is now the Secretary of State, issued a stop work order in the case of contracts, or suspension order in the case of grants and cooperative agreements. This is important, the distinction, which applies to all US government foreign assistance, including State Department, INL, DRL, USAID. There are a few exemptions, such as Egypt and Israel, and currently a new exemption under humanitarian relief work and PEPFAR, but everyone else was shut off. And by shut off, I mean we received emails up, you know, right throughout the night, and notes from our agreement officers or grant officers to say, stop work from right now. You cannot draw down any money. You cannot spend anything. All programming must cease. The reason I made a distinction between grants and cooperative agreements is simply because, I mean, and contracts, is because of the way that it is, that these things are defined, and the kinds of things that we as civil society, or those of us that have grants and cooperative agreements, are going to be the kinds of sort of ability that we have to engage with the government is quite different. So grants and cooperative agreements are subject to the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, and different rules apply to the to contracts. As a result, there's very little or no precedence or guidance for this type of suspension for us, in our case, as nonprofits that are under the CFR. And so by complying with program suspensions, it's not clear whether or not we can draw down funding for staff and overheads that are attached to projects. It's very sort of, the space is incredibly gray. And And so far, we've not been able to engage with our agreements officers or grant officers because they've also received a gag order, so they can't talk to us to give us more guidance. We do know that if the suspensions are lifted, we would have to start working pretty much immediately, which puts many organizations in a catch-22, because do you let your staff go and allow them to go and find other work, or do you keep them on unpaid and hope that at some point the suspension will be lifted in a short amount period of time, that people are not unpaid for long periods of time, and also that you can keep, that you can keep the project going again if a suspension does come down the line. We do know that all DEIA and climate work has been cut already. Most of these projects have received project or program termination notices. Elon Musk now has access to USAID's data and records and has removed the USAID website. There are a number of court orders filed by lawyers and others to try and stop this. But just so you know, there was also a notice this morning that all USAID staff were not allowed into the building this morning and were supposed to be working from home. And so I think that's sort of where the situation is. It's still really, really fluid. We're really confused about what's going on. There are some things that I'm going to chat about in a little bit, but sort of I think that's where we're at so far.
Thank you so much, Jean. Bart, I want to invite you to introduce yourself, but also to tell us a little bit about your understanding of the situation and the legal implication of what is happening right now.
Sure. Well, welcome, everybody. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. My name is Bart Houlahan. I'm one of the co-founders of B-Lab. B-Lab is the nonprofit behind the B Corporation movement that some of you might know. And I think my friend Gabby asked me to join for two reasons. One, because of my experience with B-Lab, but also I happen also to be married to a congresswoman in the United States, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan. And so I do have exposure to information as a result. And it's really important that I'm clear that I am here as an individual, not as a representative of the US government and not as a representative of my wife. But from where I sit, I do have a fair amount of information that might not be readily available. And I'm certainly not as expert as Jean is on all of the details, but I can give you some perspective from the view of a congresswoman. And to that end, Gabby, you asked specifically about the legality of where we sit. And there's been a fair amount of conversation around this, but the understanding that I am receiving is that this is mostly unconstitutional. The way that our system works, for those of you outside the United States, is that the Congress has the ability to award and determine the purse, meaning how money is deployed. And typically that's quite specific, including the USAID budget is quite specific about how capital is deployed across the globe around particular topics. That is per something called Article 1 of the US Constitution. It's very accepted from a legal perspective. Article 2 of the US Constitution makes clear that the president, the executive branch, is to dutifully administer the law. And so where we sit right now is the freeze that we're all experiencing is largely viewed as unconstitutional at a minimum. And to Jean's point prior, I think a variety of different members of the US government and the social sector are trying to figure out how to respond. First response coming from Congress is there are ways legislatively to block this freeze. As an example, I know that they're exploring blocking the tariff requirements or declarations that were made using something called the National Emergencies Act, and there is currently legislation being put forward to try to block that. They're exploring similar things, that Congress only has so many tools to use here. They can use, obviously, their voice. but most importantly, they can use their vote. And so they're exploring whether there are legislative opportunities to try to reverse this unconstitutional freeze. The second option is using the power of the judiciary, and whether there are ways to, through litigation, essentially create what's called injunctive relief and block the freeze. And this is all not unprecedented. You saw it just literally a week ago when the US government put on hold all domestic grants and loans, and that was rescinded literally within 4 days. And so the reason why I provide that as backdrop is I completely agree with Jean. This is all really, really fluid. Things are moving very rapidly. And it's not totally clear, but those are the opportunities, Gabby, we have right now from a congressional perspective in using the courts to try to reverse the current freeze.
Thank you so much, Bart. Jean, I want to go back to the survey that you shared last week to understand the findings of the survey and how this is affecting the organizations around the world.
Sure. So on Monday last week, the Accountability Lab is a member of the Open Gov Hub, which is the open it's sort of a group of about 80 something, if not more, organizations that work on governance, accountability, transparency issues. We received the directive, many of us, on Saturday morning to say we can't work anymore. And on Monday, we got together and we said, okay, what can we do? And there were three things that we sort of decided. One, we needed to create a space of shared resources. So if somebody had experienced a suspension before, what language do you even give to your agreements officer to say, yes, I agree, or I don't agree, or whatever, that you don't put yourself in legal danger going forward? And so we created this shared strength collective groups, and I can share that in the chat so that people can join it if you want to. It's very fluid. People just add information or add documentation that they have. The second one was really looking at future advocacy issues. So how do we advocate for ourselves with the right people so that it's not just a bunch of ourselves advocating to ourselves about why international development is important to ourselves. It really is about getting out there to the right people with the right language. But, you know, as you mentioned, the internal federal funding freeze of the US government was gotten rid of quite quickly because it was an easy sell to say, well, hey, half the country won't receive money. This isn't as easy with international development, or international aid, but I think that there are conversations to be had. And then the third one was really, which is sort of where your question comes to, Gabby, was data collection. We don't actually have very much information. And this was part of the problem. We don't know how big the space is. We don't know how many people are affected. And even if we did know how many people were directly affected, we have no idea what the downstream effects are, because this is completely unprecedented. So over sort of 2.5 days, actually, we put together a very short survey of 8 questions in English, Spanish, and French, where we asked nonprofits, and it turned out for-profits submitted too, about how much of their budget was affected by this. What do they need? Where were they working? On what issues were they working? And I'm going to share there's sort of a bit of a LinkedIn post that you can look at, and you can slide through the main points of the responses. So we closed it on Thursday night to be ready for a philanthropic call on Friday morning, so that the philanthropy could also better understand what the issues were. But we have kept it open and will keep it open going forward so that more people can respond, because the more information that we can give the ecosystem, the better we can respond and support the ecosystem. Some of the main points that came out of this data gathering exercise, of the 368 organizations that responded, 81% of them were nonprofit, 19 of them were for-profit. Some of these numbers have changed just a little bit, as you'll see. Regions represented were largely Africa, Asia, Latin American, Caribbean, Europe, North America, and Oceania. So we pretty much covered the world. And with some respondents covering multiple things. I think some of the big things that we want to highlight is that just over 50% of the respondents said that 100% of their budgets were affected by the stop work order. 171 respondents reported that between 50 and 100% of their budgets were affected. A quarter of respondents said that they only had a month's worth of financial resources left. But overall, 50% or more of respondents said, around 50%, but more, because some of them were like not 100% sure, said that they were likely to need to close by May. And I think that for us, this is sort of really one of the, the big things. And these are the sort of high numbers. These are just, quick. And granted, I mean, 300 and something organizations is not a representative of the whole field in any way, shape, or form. This was a 48-hour thing. But I think some of the anecdotes and things that came out of it, in particular, things like people said that there's going to be a lot of breakdown of trust between program participants, etc. Some 7,000 downstream entities would either close or be very, very badly affected by these. So of the 360 something people that participated, 7,000 sub-awardees, sub-grantees would be very, very badly affected by this process.
Jim, the numbers are striking. I know it's not a representation of the whole sector, but still is horrendous to hear how many people is affected. But we are here to speak about potential next steps and solutions. There are some questions in the Q&A that address those potential solutions. I want to raise those questions and then move to our plan to give some ideas to our members. But first, Bart, I don't know if you can help us with this, but one of the questions say that the last information is beyond a freeze, is something like absorption of USAID within the State Department. Is that possible? That change anything of the legal panorama? And also, did you know if there any legal challenge already in progress?
So I do believe there are some legal challenges that have already begun. And importantly, the information that you've received is the same that I have, that there is real talk about absorbing USAID into the State Department, and that it would be an arm of the State Department rather than an independent institution. I did hear the same information literally an hour ago that Jean heard, that USAID employees in Washington, D.C. were told to work from home for the day. I want to be really clear, misinformation is part of the landscape here too. And so I haven't had that confirmed, but that was certainly brought to this household, that indeed they were told not to show up for work. None of the move of either shutting down USAID and moving it into the State Department impacts where I started, which is the legal allocation of capital that happened as part of the budget process and as delineated by program line in the USAID budget. And so there, Gabby, one of the things that we have to parse here is immediate, short-term, and long-term, right? And so certainly in the current budget that is in place through a continuing resolution until March 14th, I believe, any stop of this capital being deployed is indeed unconstitutional. I also want to emphasize that that particular challenge has not proven to be, has not inhibited the current administration from taking many actions that might be deemed potentially unconstitutional. And so I only hold that out as a vehicle for legal action and injunctive relief, not necessarily that the administration is going to change its behavior because of that. It's going to need to come from either congressional action and or injunctive relief. And I do agree with Jean, and we'll get to it, folks, that one of the things that our job is to do is to use our collective voice, that it will have an impact. Whether it will reverse or temporary pause, I don't know, but that the information that Jean brought forward and how to collect that and speak collectively about the impact will matter.
Thank you, Bart. Jean, we have a question about what is in place right now. Some of the members in our call already have funds that they received from USAID previous to January 24. They were executing projects. What happened with that? They can keep going and execute their contracts. What is your opinion on that? I know that there is not any clarity, but if you have any idea of what they can do, they already have their money in their bank accounts and they were
even if the money is in your account, you were given a stop work order. If you were given a stop work order, which you should have through your grants officer or your agreements officer or your contracting officer, you cannot work. You are not allowed to lift a finger. You are not allowed to submit a report. You are not allowed to, unless otherwise indicated by your agreements officer or your grants officer. If you do anything, if you lift a finger, if you spend $1, you are essentially in contravention of your contract or your grant with the US government. So this is also one of the challenges that we're facing, because many of us received very, very different suspension orders. Some of us received a suspension order from INL or DRL or USAID, and each one had very, very different language. And so in some cases, the language feels like it is somewhat ambiguous about whether or not you can maybe continue to charge staff costs, for example, under the idle hands clause. You cannot. We have, until we know differently, or until you have got explicit language from your agreement officer or your grants officer or your contracting officer that gives you permission to spend $1, you cannot spend anything. Now, there's a few different things. So, for example, in the case, like if you have a reimbursable, right? So work that you did before the 24th, maybe you can, that you can claim that reimbursable. Whether or not you will get it paid is different, but is a different case. But that being said, there is an excellent, I am not a lawyer. I've just spent a lot of time on legal calls recently, but there's an excellent man called from a law firm called Nichols Liu, and they have got really, really, really good explainers on exactly what you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot speak to. They've got some really good templates. We can try and share some of the links. They've been having sort of these calls. They're also, we're waiting with bated breath. They're also doing a low bono court case where they have found a plaintiff. And one of the challenges is they haven't been able to find a plaintiff, but they found a plaintiff and they're submitting a case today. They are still looking for members. So these are people who won't necessarily have their name out in the case. It might happen, it might get leaked, but their name won't be attached to the case, but they will also be sort of supporting the plaintiff. And that will be submitted today under the international funding freeze. And so we're waiting to see what happens. It's Nichols Liu, and they've really been incredibly helpful. There's also a number of other people. There's a woman called Olga Wells who's on LinkedIn. She gives great advice, and she really has, particularly for the contractors. She's very, very knowledgeable about the language to use as you engage with navigating the FAR, which is the Federal Accounting Guidelines, on what you can and can't potentially charge the US government. But just so you know, they're currently not, we haven't received any money. We have requested money for receivables. We haven't received anything. It is, and we don't know anyone that has. So if you've received money, that's great. Please share it with the community and let us know how you did that. But please do not spend any money now. You will be in contravention of the stop work order or suspension order, and it could get you in more trouble than anything else.
Thank you, Jean. Bart, we have a question that I know you are not a lawyer, but you have a lot of experience managing organizations and companies. So probably you can give our member and its member of our governing council, Karen Spencer, any idea of how to navigate these. What happened with the people that have employees in countries where it's illegal, end those contracts without having, fair cost or without having enough time of warning, how they can navigate that, what they can do. There is any things that they can do instead of raise more money from other organizations that we know is not going to be easy in the short term, how they can manage this in the short term.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, Gabby, I'm not qualified really to answer, and I don't want to mislead folks. And I can zoom out a little bit farther to talk about how I might consider how to navigate kind of the current situation where you have staff that you do not want to let go of, and you're in a situation where there's a lack of clarity, as Jean just walked through, about whether capital is going to be coming per your current relationship with USAID. And I guess the few things that I'd lift up is I have over the weekend had a few conversations with existing philanthropists and foundations about the role that they're hoping to play. And what I heard across the board from those folks is that they wanted to be super clear that they can't fill the entire gap. It's an impossibility. And therefore, they're making very difficult choices about how to provide these temporary bridges to organizations to get us through this problem. And they are aware that they're going to be called upon for those bridges, and they're evaluating, obviously, thousands of opportunities right now. One of the things that I heard consistently, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, Gabby, as we go through our conversation, that I heard from them is the difficult decisions they're going to need to make also are not just about how do we get through these 90 days, but how an organization is planning for what inevitably, sadly, is going to be a different landscape moving underneath the Trump administration. They are acutely aware that they do not want to provide a bridge to nowhere, where they provide capital into an organization that simply is not going to be able to pivot and create a sustainable path forward. And so as you think about your next steps on how to deal with this immediate challenge, one, I would absolutely deepen the relationships you have if you have other funders. And as you talk to them, I'd be thinking about how to present a plan for how you're reducing your reliance moving forward. And importantly, I really want to be honest, I know that many of you on this call don't receive anything other than governmental funding. And so I want to be sympathetic that this isn't applying to everyone, but for those of you who have private foundation relationships, recognize the evaluation that they're taking right now is not just about how to bridge you, but they're bridging you to where, and what is your plan going to be on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Bart. We want to move to the solutions and some advice for our members. We have some other questions in the Q&A. I'm going to pass to the solution and then we come back to the questions. For time reasons, we are asking you to put your questions in the Q&A. We're not going to open mic in this session because we have almost 300 people connected and limited time. But Jean, I would love to hear from you in the situation that we are right now, which are the main advice that you can give to our members for them to navigate the situation in the next 30 days?
Yeah, we're in a similar situation. So I think I just said in the chat around costs, we don't know if we're going to get costs reimbursed. Contracting language, there were a few questions earlier on around contracting. I am not a contractor. I do not know the full rules around the FAR, but I do know that the FAR does have some rules around what you can and cannot claim from the government. I would suggest you speak to your general counsel or get some pro bono support. Around the CFR, again, we do not know because there is actually no rule within the CFR about what costs are and are not allowed. However, all advice that we have received and all the legal conversations that everyone has had is track your unavoidable costs. separately. So outside of your usual way of tracking and outside of your usual cost categories, track separately to say, my security in my building needs, we need to pay them because we have a security company that, like, or our rent or our insurance, or here are X number of staff that cannot be furloughed, cannot be transferred to a different project, cannot do anything else. They must stay on this project because they are the world expert on whatever issue, and we need to make sure that they stay with this project in case the suspension is lifted. I don't know if we're going to get paid back. We have no idea, but we are tracking this separately so that if the government says to us, hey, we will reimburse you for these costs, and these unavoidable costs, and yes, we agree with your explanation as to why these were unavoidable costs, potentially we could get paid back a little bit of money. That would be really helpful. In terms of the country legal stuff, in theory, and this is where I also look to Bart, in theory, the US government must comply with the local laws of the country in which we are operating in. So we're in a outside of the theory world, so we don't know what's going to happen, but in theory they must. So for example, it may be an unavoidable cost if, I don't know, in the case of DRC, you need to pay someone out a year versus 3, so if you could just charge their costs for 3 months, but if you had to fire them, you would have to pay them out a year, then in terms of costs, it would be cheaper for the government in order for it to comply with its requirements, the US government, in order for it to comply with DRC government rules, it would be cheaper for them to pay out Joe's salary as opposed to paying out Joe's salary for a whole year, or paying him out for a whole year to fire him, then, maybe the weight of probability. But again, I'm not a lawyer. And again, it depends. It's going to be very case by case. So my suggestion would be to just note everything down that you can, and then you can have a conversation with your agreements officer, your grants officer going forward once, the conversations they're flowing better and we have more knowledge. In terms of going forward, the things that we are trying our best is to share as much information as we can. It feels like a black hole, but I think when the community can talk to each other up and downstream, it's not just a US conversation, it is also a global conversation. If we can talk to each other, and the more we can talk to each other and share information, I think the stronger and more resilient we're going to be. I think absolutely, I take Bart's point 100%. My partner is a philanthropist who works for a philanthropy, and they're also in a panic because there's no way that they can cover the whole amount. But things that they have said was, ask your grant maker, if you are receiving philanthropic money, to convert your grant into maybe general operating support, so they can get you through this next 30 days or 60 days until until you can, hopefully the suspension is lifted, or maybe you can pivot some of your work and your ideas into something that is more collaborative and collectively engaging. There are many organizations at the end of the day that may end up merging with others, and this is not what we're hoping for in any way, shape, or form. But if that is something, and you have a friend or a partner or an organization that you maybe can share resources or share things, maybe you don't need your own comms team, maybe you can share comms resources, maybe you can cut down expenses in various ways, maybe you can, I don't know, share Zoom accounts, various things. All of these cost-cutting measures are ways that we can get through at least the next 30 to 60 days while we wait for the legal machine and for Congress to figure out what they can do around this. This is essentially, in our case, a waiting game. We can only do what we can do. What we can do is we can share this information. The other thing is we can give information. So please sign up. I reshared the links of the survey. Please submit survey results. We know that it is a very complicated time and people don't want to stick their head above the water because there are lots of fear of reprisals. But the information that we're collecting is secure, and we will not share any organizational names at all. The only reason we ask for your organization name is that we don't double count. But it's helpful. This is the kind of stuff that philanthropy can use to say, okay, we see that healthcare is maybe looking okay, but we need to push some money towards D&G work or whatever. And I think it also helps where your partners, for example, are really in trouble. Maybe you're okay for a little while, but there's a specific partner in Pakistan or wherever that is really in trouble, that needs help. And this sort of giving these sorts of information and this anecdotal evidence really, really, really helps give us a little bit of an idea of where money needs to go. And so this survey is for individuals, it's for organizations, it's for for-profits, not-for-profits. And then I'm also going to share just a link of it's shared collaboratives. We're just trying to give resources to people or have other people just share resources. So I'm just going to share a link, sign up to it, send a blank email, and it will give us a request. And feel free to dump what you've got. I mean, some of you guys have done this a lot and know how to manage this. So please share information.
Thank you, Jean. We're going to share all the links with you in a follow-up email with the recording of this session. For those that are asking about translation, sadly, this was organized in a few days. We don't have live translation today, but you can use the Zoom subtitles if you need it. Additionally, what Jean mentioned is the short-term view, but we also have a near-term and long-term view to overcome these situations. I want to share with you 3 examples that some of our members shared with me during the weekend. We have a group of members in Colombia that when they find out the situation last week, they are working on climate together as a collaboration. They reach out to one of the foundations that is a sponsor the initiative, and they get more fund for the initiative because the funder were amazed by the fact that they could organize themselves in a collaborations in a few days, and make a commitment to work together and get all the results of the project, even without the funds from USAID. Also, we have another member that in 3 days raised $300,000 using crowdfunding campaigns. So this is the moment to reach out to everyone that you know, not only the people in the social sector, also friends, family, private sector, and say, hey, we need you, please donate. The example of our members were just sharing the information in a WhatsApp group, and from WhatsApp groups to Facebook, from Facebook to Instagram, and they raised $300,000. So in the meantime, we need to be creative and have another strategies, but also we need to think in the long term. Bart, this is the first time that something like this happened, but probably it's not going to be the last one. And as you say, the landscape is going to change. So if you have any advice or strategies that we can use in the mid and long term, will be very helpful if you share it with us.
Yeah, and so before we get to mid and long, I do want to hammer a couple of points about the media just to lift things up, because I'm getting direct, beautiful chats here from people asking questions. One of the things that I think is worth trying, I cannot promise it's going to have results, is if we back up and remember in 2017, during the first Trump administration, they did a review of all foreign investments in grants and loans. It looked similar to this with one critical difference. They didn't pause funding. They used a 90-day window to evaluate whether the aid being deployed met the value set of the administration. There is a lot of talk on Capitol Hill about how we can use our collective voice to try to influence the administration to move to that type of review and lift the freeze. What that looks like for us is the type of data that Jean has been collecting and speaking together, talking to, with letters directly to the State Department, letters directly to your Congress people, your senators, where they understand the magnitude of the impact on human beings, and where possible, how to link it back, frankly, to U.S. interests. That will be what resonates most on the Republican side of the aisle, okay? And so I would not lose track of that immediate action of seeing how we can collectively raise our voice to try to look at this, acknowledge that the administration has the ability to take an evaluation of what aid fits with their agenda without rescinding all capital deployed across the globe. And so I do think that that's a worthy undertaking. Number two, 100% agree with Jean about how you go to your current funders. Some other low-hanging fruit that I think she already mentioned is one, trying to go from restricted to unrestricted in the grant that you receive, because you'll have some sympathy from your other funders. Another opportunity that I heard from at least 3 different funders over the weekend is they're happy to evaluate front-loading multi-year commitments. Go to them and say, listen, we've spread this out over 5 years. Is there a way that we can accelerate this, a portion of it or all of it, to deal with the immediate crisis? There are also organizations that are evaluating bridge loans at a 0% loan rate to try to get us out farther. But it does beg the broader question that Gabby was asking and that I mentioned before, that the reason they'll make those investments is because they see a path forward. And sadly, I don't see a scenario where aid does not contract. The degree to which it'll contract is hard to know. I've gotten questions in the chat about why even bother with Congress when currently you're staring at a trifecta with Republicans controlling Senate, House, and the White House. What I would lift up is currently in the House of Representatives, there is a 1-vote majority, literally 1 vote, okay? And so there are opportunities, and if you reflect on the last Congress, to pass anything related to capital required Democratic support, because Republicans, frankly, weren't able to harmonize around a funding vehicle that everybody could support. I don't know what it's going to look like right now. We haven't gotten there yet, but the idea of not giving up on congressional action, I think, is something we should all embrace when they have a 1-vote majority currently. And even when they do their special elections, it'll go to 3-vote. It's a very, very narrow majority. And so I did want to lift that up as well. Now, as we talk about moving forward, Gabby, like what should it look like? I would encourage, as we're thinking mid to long term, about how can some of you, not all of you, evaluate your business model so that you increase opportunities around earned income. I know that's not applicable for everybody, but I do want to just spend a moment lifting up how to start thinking about longer term opportunities, because your bridge funding is going to ask about it. Is going to ask about what am I going to rely on farther down the road so that I know that you have a path forward. And the things that I'd ask you to think about is, what do you have as an organization that is appealing to somebody outside of government? Examples could be data, could be brand, the power of your brand. It could be product extensions into the private sector. It could be product derivatives into the private sector. Start thinking about what opportunities exist for you to start bringing in earned income options to mitigate what certainly for 4 years is going to be a contraction by the US government. There are different ways you can do this. You can drop a for-profit subsidiary underneath the nonprofit that could attract private sector capital. There are impact investors who are deeply interested in the impact you all create and want to help fund it, but they will need a return of capital at a minimum. And what that looks like sometimes is you create either a brother organization or a child organization that can be owned by the parent and attract private sector capital. And so I would use this as an opportunity to think really hard about what assets you have in your organization to shift to manage what inevitably isn't going to be a 90-day crisis for us.
Thank you, Bar. I'm going to share a personal experience in my previous organization. The happiest moment of my life was when I stopped doing fundraising and we develop products and we get funds from the private sector, because that makes our life easier and sustainable. So as Jason was mentioning and Jacob was mentioning in the chat, some of our members has experience in developing this business model. We are gonna invite us to another session if you are interested in see potential opportunities for your organization and work in your business model and your sustainability. But right now I want to come back to the questions because we don't have too much time. There is a question that I think you can help us, Bar. Probably could ambassadors for international countries and people based in another countries could reach out the senators and do something to advance this process?
100%. 100%. Like, folks, use every avenue you have, whether it be current ambassadors that you have connections with from your country into the United States. Absolutely use every network opportunity. And I would, Gabby, one of the things that I would lift up for Catalyst to consider is how can we act as a collective? How can we have a common voice so that we have the ability to be louder or bigger than the sum of our parts? And so it is something that I think hard about. What is our messaging? How do we take the gene data and use it as a vehicle to lift up? Because I do believe you will hear a different story from not all, but many of our elected representatives when they understand the magnitude of the impact. And right now, the truth is many of them really don't understand it. And so, but use every vehicle you have into the US government to explain explicitly how you are potentially impacting marginalized populations and how that should ultimately serve the US interests. Make sure you include that last piece. And you can all do that. I know you all can do that. That's how you got USAID capital to begin with. And so think about how you're providing real clarity across the board about the impact on the United States should your services be discontinued.
Thank you, Bart. Jean, I know that there is not an official information, but we have some questions related to the programs affected or not. The first question is, did you know if the energy projects are going to be affected by this freezing of the fund? And also, if you know how the contracts for Ministry of Health that comes from US will be affected, or if they will be affected. And the last one, if you know that these also affect the funds deployed by the Secretary of State.
The first two questions, I have no idea. I think, you know, climate work, we have been told that climate work is not important, but then again, you know, there are potentially, maybe if, you know, US government money is involved in terms of like building something, I mean, in some countries, maybe, I don't know. But we have been told that climate and DEI are off the table and will not be engaged with at all. In terms of Ministry of Health, I can't speak. If it's PEPFAR, we do know that PEPFAR, that the freeze on PEPFAR money has been lifted. What that will look like, again, I don't know, but we do know that PEPFAR received a waiver. Other waivers are humanitarian relief, and there's a few others around security issues that have received waivers. You're going to have to check with your AO, check with your agreement with your contracting officer. And then the third question, sorry, Gabby, can you?
No, is the funds of the Secretary of State, if you think
Secretary of State.
No.
So, well, technically DRL and INL are under are under State Department money, so it's not USAID. Their funds have also been frozen. So DRL, INL grants have also been frozen. I think there are some others that are underneath I personally receive DRL and INL money. That's why I know, so I can tell you, but I don't know if there are other State Department grants that have also been frozen. But as far as I understand, all overseas foreign assistance has been frozen across the board. So And this includes DRL, INL, and USAID.
Thank you so much, Jean. As a recap of this meeting, we're going to share with you the advice, insights, links, and resources that our speakers shares with us. We are also collecting a group of resources and contacts, lawyers in different countries that are offering pro bono support for the organizations that are affected. We already have a list in Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Europe, and you can contact them, and they are going to support you to understand how to navigate this. We are also in conversations with a few ambassadors that reach out to us to understand how they can act. So if you have representative of your governments that wants to be part of the conversation, please reach out to us. Anyone in our secretariat, the members of the coordinators of your chapters, Frederick and I, and also the team of collaborations and the system learning team, we are on top of this and we want to support you in the best way we can. This is a tremendous hit for our sector, but we are sure that it's going to be an opportunity to be stronger, to learn how to collaborate, how to address these issues, and also how to be more sustainable. And then a special thanks to Jean and Bart for joining us without even notice. I give them 2 days to prepare this, and I know they have been working a lot to understand what is happening. So thank you so much, Jean. Thank you so much, Bart, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us with 4 days notice. And we will keep sending information and inviting you for subsequent sessions to understand what is happening and how we can navigate it together. Thank you. Have a great day.